Good day, everyone. In the continuation of the two approaches of observation, the participant observation, the question is what to observe. There are three consecutive processes in observation. The first is descriptive observation, second is focus observation, and a selective observation. What is descriptive observation? Descriptive observation, the researcher is open to identify that is going on. Data are collected and describe the setting, the subjects, and the events that are taking place. What to observe in the descriptive observation stages? I have here an example of Spratley 1980 distinguishes the following dimension on which descriptive data might be collected. The first is space layout on the physical settings such as factory floor and layout. The second is the object of physical elements such as office equipment, machines, and power tools. Third is the actor relevant details of the persons involved. The fourth is the feelings, emotions, activities, actions, and goals of the actors. Next is the event, for instance, meetings. And the last one is time or time, sequence of events, feelings, actions, and the like. So that is the example of what to observe in descriptive observation stage. The next is focus observation. So what is focus observation? Focus observation emphasizes the observation or often supported by interviews in which the researcher will concentrate on particular types of feelings, emotions, actions, activities, and or events and looks of emerging themes. So the third, what to observe in the participant observation is the selective observation. So what is selective observation? Selective observation, the researcher focuses on different types of actions, activities, or events and look for regularities in them, while being open to variation from exceptions to emerging patterns. So, what to observe in the focused and selective observation stages? I have also here the example. First is to help the researcher decide on what to observe in the focused and selective observation stages. So, first is look for variation of the storyline. Next, look for negative cases or exceptions. And the last one is, in case the observation is structured, develop a plan for systematic observation. In case the observation is structured, including the estimate of how many observations will enough. The last one is observe events, actions, and behavior and look for the storyline. So that which we observe in focused and selective observation stage. So those are the observed in the participant observation. So the next is we will go on to the most important method of capturing data. In participant observation is writing field notes. So what are those field notes? Notes taken to the captured data include records of what is observed, records of informal conversation with the subject under the study, and the journal notes that are kept on daily basis. So there are characteristics of good field notes. So one of these is the use of exact quotes when possible. Next is the use of pseudonym to protect confidentiality. Describe activities in the order in which they occur. Next is provide descriptions without inferring meaning. Include relevant background information to situate the event. Next is the separate one's own thoughts and assumptions from one actually observes. And the last one is record the date, time, place, and name of the researcher on each set of notes. So that is the characteristic of good field notes. Field notes is important? Yes, it is very important in observation. So one should be aware of the fact that field notes are construction of the researcher. It is the researcher who decides what goes into the field notes, the level of the details to include, how much context to include, and so on. For this reason, field notes are often regarded as being simultaneously data and data analysis, or as the first step in the process of data analysis. To summarize, the participant observation requires many skills such as commitment, the ability to fit in, tact, the ability to communicate with different members of the social group at their level, patience, the ability to observe, the ability to separate the role of participant from the observer, and so on. Therefore, before committing yourself to participant observation, you need to be certain to have the time resources, the skills required to carry out and carry through this exceptional, challenging type of research. So, that's all for the participant observation. We will go on to the next two important approaches of the observation. The first important approaches to the observation is the participant observation. Then the next one is structured observation. What is structured observation? So, structured observation is focused in nature as it looks selectively at predetermined phenomena. The focus of structured observation is fragmented into small and manageable pieces of information, such as information on behavior, actions, interactions, or events. Structured observation, also known as a systematic observation. The researcher specifies the details, what is to be observed, and how measurements are to be recorded. So, there are two different levels of structured observation. The first is the highly structured observation and the semi-structured observation. So, I have here an example of structured observation. I read the example of structured observation. A master's student of Tilburg University, Thomas Perks, is currently engaged in a research project aimed at investigating the effect of GDA labels on the consumption of candy bars. A GDA labels shows the number of calories and grams of sugars, fat, saturated fats, and salt portion of food, and expresses these quantities as the percentage of your guideline daily amount. So GDA means the guideline daily amount. To be able to observe the effect of GDA on the consumption of candy bars, Thomas is allegedly waiting for his car at a car dealer. In fact, he is observing the behavior of people who are waiting for their cars, sitting at the large table. To test one of the hypotheses of his study, GDA levels have a negative effect on the consumption of candy bars. He has put two bowls filled with candy bars on this table. In the experimental condition, the candy bars in the bowl contain a GDA label. In the control condition, they do not contain such label. In order to minimize possible observer effects, Thomas is keeping a low profile. He avoids eye contact and he smiles politely when people are trying to start a conversation. Nonetheless, he gets engaged in a conversation about the weather, computer problems, gas prices, and so on every now and then. While Thomas is waiting for his car, observing the behavior of the subject under the study, he is working on his laptop, keeping detailed account on the behavior of the subject. So Thomas is using a coding scheme that allows him to collect data in a structured way. His coding scheme predetermined categories that enable him to systematically generate information and characteristics of the subjects, events, and behavior of the subjects. The categories are closely related to the variables, including a range of confounding variables in Thomas' conceptual causal model. So that is one of the example of structured observation. So we will need the use of coding scheme in structured observation. What is coding scheme? Coding schemes contain predetermined categories for recording what is observed. Such schemes come in many forms and shapes. Some of them are very simple. They are merely allow the researcher to note whether or not a particular event has taken place. So, the type of coding scheme you will use depends on the information that you want to collect. Again, the research question of your study serves as the starting point in this case for development of coding scheme. So there are the following considerations should be taken into account with regard to the construction of coding scheme. The first is focus. Next is the objective, ease of use. Then the last one is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So what is focus? Focus from coding scheme, it should be clear what is to be observed. For instance, Thomas' coding scheme should help him establish which aspect of the settings. For instance, how many people are waiting for their car? And which type of the behavior? For instance, the subject is walking through the showroom of the car dealer. The subject is eating a candy bar. Are the observed and recorded. So that are the things to be observed and recorded in focus. So the researcher should focus on the people waiting for their car. Subject is walking through the showroom of the car dealer, and which is eating the candy bar. So next consideration should be taken into account regard of construction of coding scheme is the objectives. So what is objectives? The coding scheme and the categories should require little interference or interpretation from the researcher. So clear guidelines and detailed definition of categories should help the observer to objectively code events, actions, and behavior. So a good coding scheme is easy to use. That is the ease of use. So a good coding scheme, I repeat, is easy to use. So then last one is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So what is this? Categories in a coding scheme should be mutually exclusive and collective exhaustive. Categories are mutually exclusive if none of the categories overlap one another. A coding scheme that is collectively exhaustive covers all the possibilities. For instance, all relevant events, actions, and behavior. So that it is always possible to code. So that are the following consideration should be taken into account with regard of the construction of the coding scheme. So standard coding scheme may help you to develop your own coding scheme, allowing you to provide an answer of your research question. In some cases, frequently measures suffice to provide an answer to the research questions. For instance, again, a researcher who is merely interested in how often a manager attends scheduled and unscheduled meetings, answers telephone calls, or writes emails may simply wait for these activities to happen and record the incidences on a simple checklist. However, many researchers are not only interested in how often certain events take place, but also in the circumstances under which events take place. So that is the use of coding scheme in a structured observation. So there are ways in which the researcher can code event. The first is the simple checklist. This simple checklist provides information about how often a certain event has occurred. I have here the example of simple checklist. In the first column is the event, then the number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the next ways in which the researcher can code event is the sequence record. So what is sequence record? Allows the researcher to collect information on how often an event occurs and about the order in which the event occurs. So I have also here the example of a sequence record. So you have to write the event, then the number of the information on how often an event occurs. So the last ways in which the researcher can code event is the sequence record on a time scale. So sequence record on a time scale adds for further level of details showing the time intervals between the events. So I also have here the example of the sequence record on time scale. As you have noticed, it looks like the seconds of time. So simple checklist and sequence records are often very useful to researchers conducting structured observation, and sometimes, however, the researcher may need information about the duration of particular events. In that case, the researcher will also code the start and finish of a certain activity or event. You have probably noticed by now the structure of observation is largely quantitative in nature. As what I have said earlier, structured observation is also known as a systematic observation, where the researcher specifies the details, what is to be observed, and how measurements are to be recorded. So we have noticed that the structured observation is largely quantitative in nature. So that is why the structured observation allows you to collect quantitative information that may be used to test hypotheses of your study. The specific instrument for collecting the necessary data is your coding scheme. So there are different ways of the coding scheme, and the good coding scheme is important. So therefore, important that your coding scheme is good. In other words, that is valid and reliable.